It was dull, really dull, overcast. We didn't have the sunshine for grain fill. We were raining on and off right up through to early July, and it was cold and dark, and it wasn't sort of typical grain fill weather where you want to see bright, long, sunny days. We weren't seeing that at all. It was just wet and overcast and dull all day after day after day. It was quite depressing. So I think that's probably what contributed to grainfall. I mean, it was a perfect storm this year.
I think in Europe, a lot of people are planting less oilseed rape. Evidence is there that most people have cut back by a third. But it's too expensive to grow, and it's too risky, and insects are resistant to the chemicals that are available. So I think people are looking at other options. You're probably going to see an increase in corn.
As harvest slowly rumbles on, grain prices have been falling and are very disappointing at the moment. This is a reflection of the world harvest to date and the sentiment for the next few months. It makes you wonder if the world's farmers are getting better at producing grain, or is the weather just suited yet again? You are listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and give us a review on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. Getting a perspective on the harvest from other parts of the world can give an insight as to where grain prices might be heading. I'm delighted today to be joined by Andy Mahon, a Dubliner who's a farm manager in the heart of the Arba Belt in the UK, and Tim Bergin, another Dubliner from his farm in northern Poland. I first spoke to Andy and asked about his crops in the lead up to harvest.
It's been a terrible season, quite frankly, Michael. We got crops in well, got all our wheat drilled. We had 300 hectares of wheat drilled by the sort of second week of October, went in good order, looked good, came up well, got slug pellets and everything. And I thought, happy days, we had, good plant stands. And then it started to rain sort of not long after we finished drilling. Literally on the last field, we just about got the last field planted, and between then and Christmas, from middle of October to Christmas, we had 373 mil of rain, and then that carried on right through the spring. We ended up, our average rainfall here is 600 mil, and we'd had that 600 mil by May. So 1st of May. So it's been so wet. We lost a lot of crop to flooding, sort of waterlogging more than flooding, and slugs all through the winter. We ended up writing off 80 hectares of wheat. So it just deteriorated. Disease was like off the charts. I've never seen so much brown rust in particular in our crops. We grow a lot of Crusoe winter wheat, which is prone to brown rust, and normally you'd see it late season, but right from sort of growth stage 31 onwards, we were seeing it and chasing it all the time. Spray days were few and far between, so we were chasing our tails all the time. I had a few unfortunate sprayer breakdowns and tractor breakdowns and stuff, so I got a bit behind, and that timing, missing that timing was pretty critical for us. So yeah, we started off with great potential, but we just watched it sleep away with all the rain over winter and into the spring, and it just, we were late drilling spring crops then as well because the ground was so wet. We didn't get drilling till we were nearly on the 1st of May, I think, when we drilled our spring oats.
And in terms of, Andy, in terms of the wheat for Septoria, were you struggling with that, or were you able to keep on top of that?
We just about kept up the Septoria. The varieties I grow are fairly sort of Dawson and Saitor and Crusoe, so they're not terrible for Septoria, not very weak. But it was certainly pushed to the max, and we didn't skimp on fungicides. We didn't go with a T0 because sort of growth stage 30 because we couldn't. It was just too wet. I couldn't travel, so we missed that. And then we went with a fairly hefty, T1 sort of growth stage 32 spray and flag leaf spray. But again, I got delayed by. I had a breakdown, and then with weather delays, then we had a lot of rain at sort of flag leaf time. So I was a week late with that, and that was critical as well. We missed out badly there. So, and in fact, on some of the Crusoe, I went with 4 fungicides in the end. I went with another one. The brown rust was just rampant. It was really hard to keep on top of. I'd say brown rust and the Crusoe was more of an issue than Septoria. There was definitely Septoria about much higher pressure than we're used to seeing in this part of England.
Yeah, well, so far you've described you pretty much could be an Irish farmer for the most part.
I appreciate.
Apart from we don't really get brown rust. It wasn't really an issue. We just probably had more issues certainly with Septoria so far. But so far so good anyway. We had rubbish crops, same as yourself. Lots of holes, and there was as you say, there was lots of catching up to do, and similarly to your commentary there about getting in your spring crops, we were pretty much the same very last week in April by the time most people got in to start the spring crop, never mind finish it. So
Yeah.
we're up as far as that. So you were thinking then coming up to harvest, there might have been some potential, but it wasn't as good as you thought it could have been.
I kind of knew, I suppose, in early July, you could see I had two fields of Crusoe that just basically I could not get on top of the brown rust, and we pretty much lost the battle there, and they were burning off rapidly. The rest of it sort of hung on in there, but it was dull, really dull, overcast. We didn't have the sunshine for grain fill, and it didn't really stop. We were raining on and off right up through to early July, and they were dark. It was cold and dark, and it wasn't sort of typical grain fill weather where you want to see bright, long, sunny days. We weren't seeing that at all. It was just wet and overcast and dull all day after day after day. It was quite depressing. So I think that's probably what contributed to grain fall. I mean, it was a perfect storm this year, I think, in terms of heavy clay farm. Our drainage in some fields isn't up to scratch, and we're working on that, but and then there's still weather that we didn't get the sunshine to fill the leaves, and probably disease on the flag leaves as well that didn't help. So yeah, perfect storm for a bad disease year. And then the blackgrass, of course, just loved this wet weather, and that was rampant as well in fields, like just where there was nothing. I thought we'd had very good control, but I think also part of the issue in the autumn, we went with a heavy stack of blackgrass herbicides, and with so much rain, that washed down into the seeding zone, and we thinned the crop out. And of course, thin crops aren't great for blackgrass control. They're just not competitive enough. So blackgrass was a real issue for us as well this year. So yeah, it's been pretty bad.
Okay, that doesn't sound. Like I say, it sounds an awful lot like Ireland for the most part. Dull, cold.
Yeah,
we're kind of still waiting for the summer. It's probably a bit too late now. We've all of that, I suppose. But when did you pull the combine out and get going?
Yeah, so we probably the first week in August there, we cut those two fields of Crusoe that we'd sort of they just more or less burnt out with brown rust. We cut those two, and then we had a pause for probably a week or 10 days waiting for the rest of it. And we had pretty much a straightforward run through the wheat. I've cut all of it dry. And in the shed, yields are probably 15 to 20% down, I'd say. And quality wise, bushel weights are okay, Hagbergs are okay, but proteins are low. And that's a general theme that I'm hearing across sort of through the NFU. Proteins are low, but also nitrogen in malt and barley is low as well, which is obviously good for that job. But and I think generally the theme across that I'm hearing is yields are probably 15 to 20% down. Heavy land has suffered worse. Lighter land guys have had a better year because obviously a bit more freer draining, and they normally run out of moisture, which they haven't this year. And spring crops have been, again, if you're on lighter land, very good. On heavy land, less good. And I think even further north of England, in the north of England, it's been really bad. The guys have had a terrible time there. Just couldn't get crops established, and now they can't get them harvested. And it's a pretty dire situation up there for those guys. But
for the 15 or 20% down on the yields that you're talking about in your wheat, was that to do with just the overall not great grain fill and that kind of thing, or was it a little bit of a combination of that and wet spots and didn't grow over here and I think they only got 15 kind of thing, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's huge variability in the crops this year. Like driving the combine, you could be sat at 12 tonne a hectare in one part of the field and 6 tonne a hectare further down. So I think that's a legacy of wet spots in the field, perhaps. But you got the blackgrass problem. You've got thinning the wheat out with the herbicide damage. You've got disease. I think there's just a combination of things, Michael. There's no really one thing that you could put your finger on. It was just if you wrote the weather for a bad year, we've had it. So. I think it's a whole combination of things. So yeah, and ergot then as well as a huge problem in the UK. I'm every grain merchant I'm talking to. We've got ergot in all our wheat in the store, and I think that's going to be a big issue getting it out and getting it cleaned. I don't know if there's enough cleaning capacity to get colour sorters in the UK to get all the ergot out of the wheat.
And despite that being dressed, Andy, and clean seed and that kind of stuff, you still have that much ergot?
Yeah, I think with black grass, and it's also cereal ergot as well, very wet at flowering. But
Yeah.
there's a whole combination of factors there as well with ergot. But there's no doubt, I think it's becoming a bigger problem. It was a smaller problem last year for some farmers, but I haven't spoken to anybody who hasn't got any ergot this year. It's been pretty bad in both barley and wheat, I think. And whether that's, I don't know, there's a lot of us, with the environmental schemes growing a lot of grass margins and stuff, the bad black grass going around. There's probably a whole host of factors there at play. So,
Okay.
but it is becoming a bigger problem.
So looking forward then from where you are now, I think you're near enough finished harvest, I think, at this stage. You've all these problems, I suppose, coming at you, I suppose, from the point of view of you have bigger populations of blackgrass than you thought, you have wet spots and drainage to be done. How are you going to attack all that?
Yeah, we've sat down, had a good chat about it here. We've decided, so SFI, the Sustainable Farming Incentive, is the sort of government environmental scheme. Obviously, we haven't got subsidies over here anymore, so it's we're going to major on that and almost just roll that in for 3 years. We'll drop our wheat acreage quite significantly. The wheat market is flat as anything. There's no uplift. And, it's hard to make money. You need to be growing big yields and guaranteeing big yields to make money growing wheat. So spring cropping, if anything, is perhaps, slightly more attractive. It's less risky and you spend less money on it. So we're going to drive more into SFI. We'll drop our wheat acreage a bit. We'll still carry on growing spring oats. We're looking at growing for wild farmed, actually. That's sort of new in the UK. They've got a very different approach, but they're offering a fixed price contract at £350 a tonne for milling wheat. So it's quite restrictive in what you can and can't do. You can't use any pesticides on it. It's not organic, and you can rotate it around the farm. But I think we might try some of that this year as a spring wheat. So there's various things we can do. But the big push now for us, we're nearly finished. We've got all our cover crops drilled. We want to get mold draining and concentrate quite a lot on mold draining, ditching, getting our drainage back up to speed, and just sort of take this time over the next 3 years to really square things up and try and get on top of blackgrass a little bit as well.
Yeah, so it's you're at a junction from what I can hear, what you're saying in terms of I suppose profitability on one side, environmental kind of stuff on the other side, and trying to navigate your way through it.
Exactly that, Michael. I think, yeah. And I think, we're very lucky. We've got a very low cost base. We don't run a lot of big machinery. We haven't got a lot of staff. So we can sort of flip and flop and change. We don't want to lose land entirely. We want to keep land in good heart and try and get it better, sort of thing. So I think we're seeing this opportunity to go into the environmental schemes. They're, guaranteed money, and we can hopefully sort the land out a little bit and square things up a bit. And if prices rise again, we can soon drop back into crop production again very easily. So. Listen,
Andy, I know I'm borrowing a bit of your time out of the harvest. Now you're nearly done, but you still have lots of stuff to do. Thanks very much for coming on. We might catch up with you again in a couple of months to see maybe how your autumn drilling is getting on and how the entry into those SFI schemes are going for you. So look, and Andy, thanks very much again.
Pleasure, Michael. Good to talk to you.
Now let's hear from Tim in Poland. And I first asked him the similar question of how his crops looked in the lead up to harvest.
Crops kind of looked, they were the strongest looking crops we've ever had. We got a reasonably decent spring. We got some moisture early on. We went the whole month of May without rain, which wasn't very good. But then when June came, we started to get almost enough rain. So the mass of the crops, how would you say the volume of the crops was the biggest ever?
Okay, and given that it was a little bit wet in June, that was sufficient to continue grain fill, or was there any other issues or complications with disease or any of that kind of thing?
Not really, no. It was for the grain, it was pretty good. Right. It caused some issues with potato blight. There's a strain of potato blight in Poland that's resistant to all chemicals. So we did have some issues there, but not. We got it under control pretty quickly.
Okay, yeah, we're dealing with that, and I'll be talking to people later on about that. We have an event on later on. But in terms of other years, I know, Tim, that you, I suppose, almost run out of water to a degree. But this year you're saying you had enough. But did you still have to supplement any of that in terms of irrigating, or is that all mostly back for your potatoes?
All for potatoes. Yeah, we kept irrigating the potatoes. I think at one point it was kind of unnecessary to irrigate them, but we like to keep moisture on them, so we irrigate them every night. What we were doing was we were putting on less water every night. We were putting on the minimum amount we can put on, which is 5 millimeters. So we cut it back to 5 millimeters per night, and but we're pretty much watering all the time. But it's just for at this point, it's just for yield.
Coming back, Tim, to your grain harvest. When did you start?
29th of June, winter barley.
And was it reasonable sailing from there in terms of, being able to get in when you wanted to get in and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was a slightly messy harvest, but we still finished well ahead of schedule. We got enough kind of dry days, and we managed to cut everything. I think the highest moisture we had was 17%. So it was a pretty easy harvest. I mean, we were able to wait around for the moistures to go below 15 and then harvest. So, yeah, I think it was pretty easy. We finished 3 weeks ago. Okay.
Right. Well, geez, that's fantastic. We're only about maybe 40% here, 40% of the way. We still have an awful lot of harvest to finish off here in Ireland, as you might know. But in terms of the grain, the higher grain that you had there, you had a small bit of grain. You're saying at 17%. What's your procedure for drying that? Do you have sufficient drying capacity, or is it on floor, or is it?
Yeah, we have sufficient drying capacity. We kind of didn't really need the dryer this year. I think we might have dried 200 tons maybe. Yeah, we modernized the whole infrastructure around the dryer. We spent an awful lot of money on it this year, and then we didn't need it. So,
okay, well, you'll be sure in the years to come you'll definitely will need it. It's always the way, anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, given the fact then that you were saying that you had some really good looking crops on the way into harvest, how did your yields compare, and maybe compared to your five-year average?
So, I mean, winter barley looked like a 10-ton crop. It really, really looked like a 10-ton crop, and it came in at 9 tons, which was still good. 9 tons at 14%, so it was good, but it wasn't as good as it looked.
Okay.
And it can be directly connected to the fact that it never rained during May,
And on your winter wheat side of the house?
Winter wheat came in almost at the same 8 to 9 tons. It looked more. It all looked like 10-ton crops, and it seemed to be about a ton less than we thought. But the quality was good. The protein was high. We had proteins above 14%. A lot of the time, the Hagberg number was good as well. So overall, it was quite good.
And Tim, that's all milling quality that you grow there, no feed.
Yeah, milling quality. I think that the spread this year on the price is not that great, so we didn't sell it all as milling. Some of it went as feed. But it did the numbers this year. It's very hard to get the numbers right, to get the protein right. But for some reason this year the protein was very good.
All came together. Well, 14% is very good, in fairness.
Yeah.
Excellent stuff. And what's your sense then in terms of the yields around your area, or maybe that kind of general region? Are they all stacking up reasonably well, the same as yourself, or in terms of a 5-year average?
Yeah, it's hard to say really. I think the people who use conventional tillage weren't doing as well because the dry weather had caused bigger problems for them. So, people who were ploughing were definitely getting 1 or 2 tons a hectare less than people who are doing minimal tillage. That's, directly connected to the amount of moisture that you're keeping in the ground. Oilseed rape was disappointing for everybody, including us. It looked like a massive crop. Looked like a 5-ton crop. And I think oilseed rape came in at 3.5. And some farmers in our area were getting yields as low as a ton per hectare.
Oh, geez, right. Okay. Just ran out of water, did
it? No, I think there was a late frost. So there was a frost during flowering. It kind of spring came a bit early and the flowers came out a bit earlier than normal, and then there was a late frost. So I think that did some pod damage. and then it's very hard to control the insects in oilseed rape now.
Okay.
So a lot of insects damage the pods too. So we were looking at a ton and a half per hectare less than we thought we were going to get. And,
yeah.
I think I heard some really terrible yields on oilseed rape in the whole of Poland, not just our area. I think Germany was bad too. I heard everyone was disappointed.
Okay. But in terms of the grain of the cereal grains, their averages it's around an average year, is it, or maybe slightly better? Because certainly up maybe further south from where you are was very wet, kind of similar to ourselves. But I know you were saying you were relatively dry in comparison. You kind of missed the worst of all the rain.
Yeah. We've definitely missed the worst, and we missed all that flooding and stuff that you might have seen on the news. I won't say it's impossible to flood up here, but it's really hard to flood up here because of the soil type.
And looking forward, just in terms of the markets, Tim, where do you see them? I know they've taken a bit of a plunge over the last kind of month or 6 weeks, and they're looking pretty depressing at the moment. What's your view or take on it?
It's very hard to gauge it, other than that the evidence is that there's plenty of grain around and there's plenty of grain in store. That's kind of fact, but I don't know where it's all coming from, because the whole southeastern corner of Europe is effectively burnt up. So Bulgaria, Romania, Eastern Hungary have where they traditionally grow a lot of corn. Those crops are actually destroyed. They're not even, farmers went out and silaged grain crops a month ago, just to try and salvage something from them. So, and I'm surprised that the grain markets haven't taken that into account, because certainly in parts of southeastern Europe, there's nothing to harvest. That's how bad it is. Yeah.
Yes. Wow. I must we must put in a call to Jim McCarthy. He's obviously down in Bulgaria side of the house, so he'll give us an update. I must put a call into him and see how he's getting on. But
yeah, so he'll know for sure. But it's certainly we've seen some of the crops down there, and there's basically nothing there. Nothing.
Wow. Okay.
In Bulgaria, the only thing left alive are the vineyards. Nothing else survived.
Okay. So yeah, I suppose even given that there was, I should say, there seemed to be plenty of grain coming out of Ukraine and Russia, and America looks reasonable. So there's the sentiment is the other way, I suppose, at the moment, at least, anyway.
Yeah. I don't see any rise coming in it anyway. I know the price has fallen since the harvest. The price fell, so yeah, doesn't. It's not inspiring, that's for sure.
Not inspiring, but
I think in Europe a lot of people are planting less oilseed rape. Evidence is there that most people have cut back by a third.
Wow, geez, that's a lot.
Yeah, wow. But it's too expensive to grow, and it's too risky, and
yes.
The insects are resistant to the chemicals that are available. So I think people are looking at other options. You're probably going to see an increase in corn. And
similarly yourself, have you cut back yourself on oilseed rape?
Yeah, we cut back by 100 hectares. Yeah, we normally sow 300 hectares, and we just sowed 200.
Okay.
And I don't even know why we did it, to be truthful, because the numbers don't stack up on it.
Okay.
It's just it's there for rotation. Really, at this moment, it's only for rotation and nothing else. And I think what we look at long term is possibly moving over to growing more maize and less risky crops like oilseed rape.
Okay, and I suppose we might just on the last question, in terms of the rest of the stuff to go, you still have some maize in the ground. How's that looking?
We didn't plant any maize this year.
Oh.
No, and it's it's a fabulous year for maize. Maize crops look certainly in our area, it looks brilliant. There's maize. I've seen maize in our area now that will be ready for combining in 2 weeks' time.
Okay, and is that unusual, Tim? I thought you had maize most years, no?
Yeah, we just didn't bother with it this year.
Okay.
Yeah, we kind of, just the way the rotation was, or work-wise, we didn't bother with it.
Okay.
I think we'll probably plant more maize next year, and indications are that's what other farmers are doing as well.
Okay. Listen, Tim, I really appreciate your time. I know you're really busy. You have lots of things on your books at the moment. So, listen, we'll touch base with you again in a couple of months' time again to see how you're getting on in terms of the autumn planting.
Certainly glad to talk to you.
So that's it for this week, and my thanks to Tim and Andy for joining me on the show. There are a couple of events which are very worthwhile to attend over the coming weeks. Today, Thursday, August the 29th, there's a Blight workshop in Teagasc Oak Park at 2 p.m. This event will compare different blight programs at the site in Oak Park. Looking at the trial this week, there's certainly a lot to be learned from the trial. In a couple of weeks' time, we will hold the Teagasc Crops Forum yet again. The event will be held on Wednesday, September the 11th in the Cadian Hotel, Newbridge, and the event will kick off at 2 p.m. This year we're focusing on planting rotations and early planting of winter barley, and also a special focus on soils. Given the battering soils have taken in the last 24 months, we've a great lineup to discuss soil remediation and soil drainage. If you had a patchy crop in 24 due to wet spots, then this is the conference to attend. Entry is free and it's an in-person only event. So that's it for this week, and if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.